why do horror movies feel more evil, kind of darker than they did in like the 70s, 80s, 90s, particularly like the movies we love and think of from the 80s and 90s? There is sort of this rash of making everything very satanic centered, very demonic centered, very cult centered, very much around glorifying, putting, people making deals with the devil sort of to sell their souls for worldly power and all of those types of things. But we never see the movies do the other side. They don't do it. Like they tell you, all the movies, like they basically tell you now, the horror movies that are really leaning into the satanic horror, they tell you the devil is real. They tell you Satan is real and demons are real, things that they're pulling from, the Bible, basically Christian scriptures. And yet they never show you the equal good power. And so the thing becomes very heavy. Whereas if you think back to horror films, let's go with the 80s horror films. You think about Friday the 13th movies or Nightmare on Elm Street movies, Halloween movies. These movies were exploitation, like over the top, fun, kind of ridiculous horror that played as morality tales. If you took your clothes off and you got naked and you had sex and you partied and you shirked your responsibilities and you drank or all those kind of things, you were punished essentially. And it was by a over the top monster done with practical effects. And almost those monsters became like icons. They were almost fun. I mean, Freddy Krueger did become fun. He became a wisecracking smartass. So, and then other movies, I think of things like Cellar Dweller and even The Thing. They became all about the artistry of not just the story, but the practical effects and things like that endeared them to us. They were obviously fake, obviously over the top, but you could enjoy them, throw popcorn, laugh with your friends, and you got the sort of good versus evil part of this out of it, and you moved on. They were fun and enjoyable. Now there's a deep darkness to them that sort of lingers with you, and the evil is never punished. The evil is often portrayed as sexy and rewarded, and a lot of morally gray area characters. And I'm not really sure why we got to that point. There's definitely a theme, and they could say, well, these are cheaper to do because they're not practical effects and things like that. But there's definitely seems to be there's like a purpose to them that they're getting at. Why So BlueTube says, he says, I like demonic, cult and satanic stuff. The stakes are higher. That's just me. I like my share of creature. See, listen, it's not the actual, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. It's not the actual making of those movies that's the problem. Like, you made those movies back when you had like The Exorcist, which is a very hard movie to watch. But there was above equal. That's the other thing. The evil is always portrayed as equal. It's not equal. But there was always the other side was told, right? In The Exorcist, the priests come in and the power of Christ is in the faith is going to beat back the evil. That is not shown the same way now. That's not shown. They show that the evil from that book that they're referencing exists, but they never want to show the power of the good that exists from it. And the question is why? For a story to be actually told the right way, you have to have both sides of it, and they're deliberately leaving out the one side. And so it's not the actual movies like that are the problem. It's what they're taking out and how they're streamlining the message of those movies to you that they didn't used to do. And it makes those movies much heavier. It makes them get into you in a different way. You can't just watch them like you could watch Friday the 13th, the final chapter, and then leave it, man. That was cool, man. You know, you had people skinny dipping and Jason killing people and Corey Feldman shaving his head and all this stuff. It wasn't serious. Now that they want this, they want it to be very insidious, not the movie, but very insidious the way they go about this and the message that they push into you. And the question is, why? Because a lot of horror movies are not succeeding with it. I mean, Robert Eggers' The Witch is very satanic. I've covered that on the channel, and it doesn't. I mean, he said in an interview that, like, you know, he was against it. It's deliberately made as the devil, yay, you know, sell out your family and your soul and you'll get rewarded with riches and exotic butters and eternal life and all these kind of things. The question is why? The question is why? We went from horror movies that were fun and practical effects and things like that to very deep, dark messaging. And the question is why? And it's just something I've been noticing more and more. Yes, more self-contained. Like if you go and watch Ready or Not 2, you leave with the impression that the whole world, that there's a whole connection of the whole world that is committed to this evil. And so it's not self-contained. It's like it's all out there and it's winning and it's over you and it's more powerful. Correct. Something like The Conjuring is heavy, but it's scary, but you have a good winning in the end, right? For the most part. I would say that there's something to that, a demoralization campaign inspired to, you know, fight for ideals. I would say that hopeless surrender. Yeah, hopeless people do surrender. I mean, that is, if you read, you know, Dante's Inferno, that's, you know, that's basically what hell is. It's the absence of hope. One of my favorite horrors is Sinister, but looking at it now, I have a different view because it's about the baddie eating kids, which is, yeah, I mean, you could see that's what I mean. And when you start to get all this cult stuff and it starts to get too much reality and it's not contained in the movie, and good is kind of pushed away and mocked and made fun of, and then you get this sense that it's all out there oppressing you. That's very different than watching Cellar Dweller, right? It's very different where somebody's, you know, drawing a monster with, you know, cursed ink, then it comes to life and wreaks havoc ridiculously, you know. It's very, very different. I'm more into creature features, thrillers. Yeah, they're overall, they're not for me either. They never really have been. And I've always said that on the channel, but I prefer what you would call cozy horror films, like mystery, dark, you know, kind of like spooky small town, haunted house, creature features, you know, Friday the 13th, all of that just seems, I don't want to say harmless, but they're mostly morality tales and they're spooky and atmospheric versus being trying to get you to basically accept that evil is going to win and you should give over to evil. Like, I'm not into that. And I don't understand why that has become so ubiquitous lately. It does feel somewhat like that. Like it's a very mocking thing. And I don't understand why, because it still represents about 70% of the country. So it's very interesting that you would do that. And you would not do that to any other religion. They wouldn't do that. And it's not any other religion that they're borrowing the other side from, the Satan, demons, and so they're not borrowing it from another side. They're borrowing it from the Christian base. Jason says the problem with movies that make Satan a real part of the story, therefore also make God and Jesus canon. That's it. But they never show up. Just that is exactly it. When you make it, we're movie nerds. So think about Star Wars and what's canon in Star Wars and what's not, or what's canon in Marvel Comics or what's not. When you take Satan and the demons, specific demons from the Christian Bible, and you make them real in your stories, then you are canonizing God and Jesus. You're saying that they are part of that canon. That is 100% right. But they never show up. They're mocked. They're not talked of. They're not brought up. They're only taking the evil side and pushing it into the story. But when you take that, then you make Jesus and God part of your official canon too. That is 1000% what I was getting at. 1000% what I was getting at. But they conveniently leave it off. And then that just makes it completely dark, right? Compared to, a wisecracking Freddy Krueger who's making jokes, now prime time, bitch. It's very, very different, very different. And why it went to there with everything that we think of in society now and how things are, it's very dark and unsettling. Well, that's it. It seems to be in their mind, it's to mock the good. It's to mock Jesus, because if they mention him in there, then people will accuse them of pushing them on him. But you have to ask why people have no problem having the devil pushed on them. Comes from the same religion. I mean, we could go back. There's always been I taught ancient history. There's always been a version of the devil, one way or the other. There's always an ultimate evil. I mean, you go back to the Zoroastrians and Ahura Mazda, and like you can go back, but you have to ask yourself why they're only okay with the negative side being pushed. Carrie says maybe the evil is going to win thing is just a byproduct of the franchise model. Well, it just keeps appearing in so many different movies, though. It's not any one franchise. Legend is one of the coolest devils ever committed to film, but what happens to him at the end? The darkness doesn't win. It can't. That's the difference. That is definitely one of the coolest, scariest looking devils. I mean, he gave me nightmares. He was my nightmare vision of what the devil looked like as a kid. Always has been. But he don't win. And he's also not glorified. You could argue that it comes down to spiritual warfare. You can argue that. There's definitely a difference. And I think that's why, no matter what it comes down to, I think that's why it is so much easier. Why do we keep getting 4Ks of 80s horror movies, 90s horror movies, 70s horror movies? Why do people keep talking about those movies? Why are we getting still shirts and stuff released, new stuff of The Thing and all those movies like that? Why do people go back to those? Because there's a comfort to them. They're morality tales. They're funny, they're funnier, they're fun, practical effects, artisan. There wasn't nefarious. It did, even if there isn't anything nefarious now, they make it feel dark and heavy like there is. Back then, there was no question. There wasn't. And looking back at it, I'm sure at the time there's people that panicked. You had the whole satanic panic. But when you look at that in retrospect, compared to where we are now, and maybe that means they were right. They say, hey, you gave an inch and then it started there and it went here. And that's a problem. So there could be something to that. But people go back to those because they're comfort. They're easy. They're not too heavy. They're not trying to push anything on you. That's it. They're just fun and easy to watch. I just kind of have been thinking about that. We got some other things that we're going to talk about, but definitely there is a difference between the horror movies we grew up with and loved that are fun, easy to watch, about practical effects, morality tales, and atmosphere, and things that are very insidious now and sort of dark and pushing that kind of thing. So I got more to come on that, but that's enough of that right now. That was just one that I've been thinking about for sure. So horror movies, very different in the 80s than now. I know.